It's heartbreaking because it happens too frequently.
Tonight, an arrest after a 14-year-old was killed in Winnipeg's downtown.
There's a lot of private information that was put at risk,
raising concerns about the postal service in Iqaluit.
We have to pack about 700 hampers for that many families, just to help them through the season.
And lending a hand to help spread holiday cheer. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Winnipeg, where a 17-year-old male has been charged with second-degree murder in connection with the fatal stabbing of a 14-year-old Indigenous girl. Advocates are now calling for more mental health supports for Indigenous youth. Tamara Pimentel has the story.
A sacred fire is lit for a 14-year-old girl who was fatally stabbed in Winnipeg last week. It's the kind of gathering that is all too common in Winnipeg.
You know, every time I hear of, another woman, girl, two-spirit person, Indigenous person being lost, it's very heart-wrenching. It's heartbreaking because it happens too frequently. It's happening too much, and it's just, and in this case it's no different, and it's particularly harder too because she was very young.
Heidi Spence is with the MMIW Liaison Unit for Manitoba, Kuwaitanui, Okanagan. She joins dozens in supporting family and friends of the girl. A 17-year-old boy is facing second-degree murder charges in connection with her death. Police believe the victim and suspect knew each other. They were together along with two other girls Friday afternoon, 1 block from police headquarters in downtown Winnipeg. Police say an argument led to the suspect producing a knife and stabbing the victim multiple times before fleeing. She was taken to hospital where she succumbed to her injuries.
Our community is in a constant state of loss. We need more support.
MP for Winnipeg Centre Leah Gazan says the ongoing violence against Indigenous women and girls is a crisis that needs the attention of all levels of government.
We also know that we need more mental health supports, addiction supports, more outreach programs for young people in our communities, more safe spaces. We know all of that. It's not a lack of knowing, it's a lack of political will.
The suspect is in custody. Winnipeg police are not releasing the girl's name. The Youth Criminal Justice Act prevents police from identifying victims of violence under the age of 18. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To Edmonton now, where a judge has ruled that the city's police service can go ahead and remove 8 encampments of homeless people across the city. The Coalition for Justice and Human Rights had asked for an injunction to stop the evictions. Up to 135 structures will be removed, providing there is space and shelters to house the people in them. And the encampments will be given 48 hours notice before the shelters are taken down. This temporary injunction will be in place until January 11th, when the court will look at a permanent injunction against all encampments in the city. Premier of the Northwest Territories says it will take partnerships to solve housing issues north of 60. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs takes a look.
Premier R.J. Simpson has been citing housing as one of, if not the biggest issue facing the Legislative Assembly. So APTN National News is asking all things housing. Besides working with municipalities on housing construction, Simpson says the GNWT will focus on other partnerships.
Because the Indigenous governments have, they've been working with the Government of Canada and received a lot of money for housing. So we've had lots of requests from the Indigenous governments for us to go shoulder to shoulder with them to Ottawa and try and get more resources for our shared priorities. And so that's one thing that this next government really needs to focus on. Having that infrastructure in place so that we can go to Ottawa and we can bring back money with the Indigenous governments.
The Premier says when it comes to cost of living, the Territory needs to educate the feds to ensure they aren't rolling out a one-size-fits-all policy.
So something like the carbon tax might be an effective way to reduce use down south or have people switch to alternative fuels or ways of heating their home. But there's a different set of rules up here in the Northwest Territories. We don't have the same infrastructure. We didn't develop the same infrastructure under the old set of rules, and we're expected to do that under this new set of rules that is really punishing the North.
The latest 2021 census shows just over 13% of households are in need of core housing, aka their home did not meet at least one adequacy, affordability, or suitability standard. Recently, Lucy Kuptana, MLA for Nunakput, was named Minister responsible for Housing NWT and Minister responsible for the status of women. It's a busy portfolio. Housing NWT is responsible for more than 24 public housing units and offers a range of public and market housing programs like rent subsidy, homelessness assistance funding, and a home purchasing program. This spring, the National Indigenous Housing Network and Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network demanded that the NWT declare a state of emergency for housing Indigenous people, particularly women and girls. They give a failing grade to Housing NWT, the Territory's housing agency. In the last Legislative Assembly, Simpson was a Minister of Justice. He said there would be no review of the Residential Tenancy Act, a piece of legislation developed in 1988, which advocates say is outdated and protects the rights of landlords only. But in this Legislative Assembly, that may change.
Housing situation in the Territory, there could be a reason to review the Residential Tenancies Act. We need to look at all avenues to make it easier for people to get into homes, to make it more attractive to develop homes, to become landlords. So I think that at this point, everything's on the table.
Simpson wouldn't comment on whether his government would recognize housing as a human right or whether big companies like Northview, who own 80% of the Territory's rental units, would be broken up. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Still in the north, Nunavut's MP is raising concerns about the poor quality of postal service in Iqaluit. NDP MP Lori Iqaluit wrote a letter to the minister responsible for Canada Post, Jean-Yves Duclos, last week. She describes the situation as, quote, a disaster since a second post office was opened in the city in October. A changed addressing system caused serious delays for those receiving government checks, and mail was sent to wrong locations. An emailed statement from Duclos' office says Canada Post is aware of the concerns and working to resolve them. The problems caused Nunavut's Information and Privacy Commissioner to contact the territorial government about potential privacy breaches.
Family income support programs, even payroll from the government of Nunavut. There were a lot of concerns, definitely with somebody else's mail going to another mailbox. So there were definitely, the privacy commissioner was correct to bring out this concern because there's a lot of private information that was put at risk.
The federal government is pumping $3 million into 4 Northern Food Innovation projects. Those dollars come from the Northern Food Innovation Challenge, an initiative under CanNor. The challenge supports projects in Indigenous communities to help improve food security in the Northern Territories. Now in Phase 2, the funding will go towards scaling up projects announced in Phase 1. They include a traditional foods kitchen facility in Whitehorse, bison meat processing plant in Fort Simpson, and a country foods harvesting program in Clyde River. Coming up after the break, we'll hear from a task force looking into Indigenous identity fraud. Stick around. Welcome back. As academic institutions are working to prevent Indigenous identity fraud, Dalhousie University in Halifax recently released a report called Understanding Our Roots, Task Force on Settler Misappropriation of Indigenous Identity. The report includes recommendations to verify Indigenous identity of faculty, students, and staff, and investigate suspected cases of identity fraud. Concerned how the verification process may violate human rights and research ethics, two Mi'kmaq law professors from the university, Naomi Mtalik and Cheryl Simon, wrote a 75-page human rights and legal analysis of the report. They spoke to Sav Jonza earlier.
Welcome, Naomi and Cheryl. After Dalhousie published their report to prevent Indigenous identity fraud, what led to writing the human rights and legal analysis?
Well, I'll start. Well, after reading it, I think we both noticed and had talked, and I was talking to some other people as well, that there was a lot of gaps missing, and we had a lot of concerns in terms of the narrow categories that were chosen for who is Indigenous. And with our backgrounds, I've done a lot of work on Indigenous identity stuff, Section 35 cases, also some equality stuff. And to me, there were some really big gaps, and also some concerns about the process as well, and hearing about implementation. So those were all reasons that after trying to raise flags and not getting very far, we decided we needed to write something.
And where did the task force on settler misappropriation of identity go wrong?
Well, I think that there were several process issues that the task force took that could have been more full. For instance, there was a lot of focus on the local Indigenous community, which is Mi'kmaq people we absolutely support because this is Mi'kmaq territory. But it's important to remember that Dalhousie as an institution has Indigenous peoples from across the country, from the United States, from different international tribes and nations as well. And that wasn't reflected in the report and the consultation process.
Yeah, and I think on the substance part of it, just to add on, I think it's that it's trying to treat the issue of fraudulent misappropriation of identity by non-Indigenous peoples. It's trying to sort of use that brush to people who kind of fall in the, it uses mostly status and federally recognized entities as the basis for who's Indigenous, but there's a whole range of folks in the middle of between, people who have status or are recognized as First Nations, and versus, white people who are fraudulently pretending to be Indigenous. There's a whole range of folks, and we're not saying all of that range, but we're saying there's a significant chunk of that range who are Indigenous and who are not covered. I mean, for me, the one that was the biggest concern and remains the biggest concern is because of the Indian Act second generation cutoff rule, which says that all kids born after 1985 who only have one status Indian parent, they're no longer status Indians. There's a whole bunch of kids like that and grandkids today on First Nations all over Canada. And those kids, according to the report, wouldn't be eligible unless their band has a membership code that recognizes them. And that sounds great on paper, but only like 40% or even 30% of bands actually have membership codes. And most of them use the Indian Act rules. So those kids would still be excluded anyway. But they are, our kids and our grandkids.
That's some great points. Dalhousie admits there are professors with false claims to Indigenous identity who have benefited professionally and financially. Should they be charged with fraud? Why or why not?
Well, I think the process of academic fraud has already been established in the university. And so when it comes to the consequences of, committing academic fraud, those processes need to be utilized. So whether or not, there's ever any kind of criminal liability with it, that's a separate issue. But with respect to people that are advancing their careers on these fraudulent identities, we need to make sure that it's actual fraud and not just people that colonialism has had an impact on their families and their communities and their nations, because there's a distinct difference there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're not saying don't go after frauds. But we're saying it's a lot more complicated than a lot of people think it is. And it really requires us to kind of have a really good understanding of how the Indian Act and other colonial policies have been used over time with the purpose of extinguishing us as people. And that in ways like I just described about the second generation cutoff rule, it's still doing that. And so we need to be wise to that and see that. And so when we look at, who is doing that, they're making real distinctions between white people who are knowingly pretending they're Indigenous people for gain, and then Indigenous people who have complicated identities, who don't necessarily have status, but there's more to it than just saying they're frauds. That's really what we care about here, and what we're really worried about on our report and some of the other universities that have acted on this, that it's missing that really important nuance, which is actually sort of aiding colonial policies or strategies that were aimed at genocide.
And our communities are so vulnerable because of the genocide that we've experienced and the impacts of the Indian Act, that we have to make sure that Indigenous peoples are not assumed to be guilty while they're undertaking these processes. We need to take a trauma-informed approach to this issue and make sure that we are not causing more harm as we explore this issue in order to identify people that actually have committed an academic fraud.
And what has Dalhousie's reaction been?
Well, we wrote the report, we sent it to them, and we've made it public just because we didn't feel that concerns were really being addressed. And so we met with them. We are hoping that they're going to be open to thinking about what we wrote and the categories and the sort of nuances we're trying to bring to this. We don't know yet. But we think this is an important discussion, not just to have at our institution, but across the country, because people are feeling a lot of pressure to react to these stories that are coming out about pretendians and fraud. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have our own people who are harmed and vulnerable and who've been affected by colonialism, and we got to make sure that we don't design processes that are going to throw them out in the cold, because that's not how we are.
All right, well, we'll have to end it there, but thank you so much for speaking with us today, Naomi and Cheryl.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Really appreciated it. Thanks.
Important conversation there. Well, with the rising cost of food and everything else for that matter, that has more people relying on services like food hampers this holiday season. We'll tell you about a grassroots organization doing what they can after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And today's submission comes from Dominique Nadeau in Winnipeg. Dominique snapped this picture of deer majestically walking through the city streets. If you want to be featured as our photo of the day, you can email your pictures to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 0 for Fredericton, -1 in Halifax. -16 with snow in Kuujjuaq, snow and 7 below in Nain. Sunny and -1 in Montreal, -11 with snow in Val-d'Or. -1 with snow for Sault Ste. Marie and North Bay. -6 in Thunder Bay, 12 below in Sioux Lookout. -14 with the sun out in God's Lake, 11 below in Norway House. Cloudy and -4 for Winnipeg and Brandon. 0 in Regina, +1 in Saskatoon. -1 in cloudy in Meadow Lake, snow and 6 below in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, -6 with snow in High Level, 1 below with flurries in Fort McMurray. +1 in Edmonton, a sunny high of 4 in Lethbridge. +11 with showers in Vancouver, 11 in Victoria. 6 in Prince George, snow and 0 in Smithers. -26 in Old Crow, -9 with snow in Whitehorse. -10 in Yellowknife, 19 below in Norman Wells. -18 in Sax Harbor, 17 below in Paulatuck. -14 for Chesterfield, 25 below in Whale Cove. -21 in Resolute, 20 below with snow in Iqaluit. In Winnipeg, a grassroots operation came together to spread holiday cheer to hundreds of people in need of a helping hand. With the rising cost of food, video journalist Rachel May explains what it takes to feed families over the Christmas season.
That's a lot of stuff. Super fun. I need this random stuff.
This living room is currently home to enough groceries to feed hundreds. The grassroots organization Peg City Kindness Crew aims to provide enough essentials for everyone to enjoy this holiday celebration.
We have to pack about 700 hampers for that many families. Just to help them through the season.
Co-founder Jay Malowski says the group, made up of 6 volunteer board members, has seen gaps in food security firsthand.
It was overnight. Within 27 hours, we had, I think, 650, 700 applicants, and we were like, oh, we can't keep accepting people. We need to shut this down, and we'll commit to this 700 and doing our best to fill those, but we can't take any more on.
Malowski also experienced food insecurity after they were laid off during the COVID-19 pandemic. Peg City Kindness came through for them.
They've been really kind and shown me love, and that's another thing that pushes me really to do this.
When it comes to people asking for a hamper, Peg City prides themselves on being a judgment-free zone.
We try really hard to practice what we preach and meet people where they're at.
The hampers will be delivered to families in time for the holidays. Peg City Kindness Crew says there will be more initiatives in the new year. Rachel May, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Some of the most northern First Nations in Manitoba saw a special visitor arrive last week.
Oh, Merry Christmas!
The Santa Express landed in Bunbonabee Cree Nation. It was the first stop of the Man in Red's tour to bring gifts and treats to children. The annual event was started in 2009 by the MKO with the help of Perimeter Airline. Grand Chief Garrison Satie says for some of the children, it's their first time meeting Santa.
We want to be able to bring Santa to the communities because the kids always get excited, and I've seen this many times how excited they are when they see Santa coming off the plane. The energy and also the excitement in the air is really something that you can't really explain it, but it's something that we have to do for those children.
And Santa is stopping in about 20 different communities to deliver 20,000 gift bags. Busy guy. Well, Cree policy analyst Jennifer Leowitz is our guest on a new episode of Face to Face tonight. Known on social media as Jennifer L., Iqaluit has tens of thousands of followers on Twitter and TikTok. But being vocal about politics has also garnered her a lot of harassing and threatening comments, especially on Twitter.
I used to take it very personally because I'm somebody that is very conscious of how people feel about me and the actions and what that's making other people feel like. But at the same time, I had a conversation with Jody Wilson-Raybould because we were at the same event this summer, and she actually wrote in my book, like, keep doing what you're doing, and your voice is so important. And if I have to be the one that, builds those bridges and opens that roadway up for other people to feel comfortable being in their own skin and existing politically, then I'll do that. TikTok's a little bit of a different place. I feel that when people can hear me and see me speaking in such a calm way, I don't get the vitriol that I do on a place like Twitter.
And you can watch our entire interview with Jennifer in less than 2 minutes' time. Also, we discussed the recent AFN election and the potential of a spring federal election. Fun conversation. Well, that is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. You can find much more over on our website. That's aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Stick around. Face to Face is next. Have a great night.